I was a superhero for an hour. It was a terrible experience. I'm not usually one to accept dubious offers at self improvement random men dressed in capes on the street, but I'm also not one to pass up a conversation with someone dressed in a cape. I mean, how often do you see that? And to be honest, I've often wondered what society would be like if people were allowed to walk around wearing things like capes or top hats or long, flowing scarves. I like to think it would be very fun, whimsical, and possibly even progressive society. But anyway, I had gone out to grab a cup of coffee and was walking from the grocery store, where the coffee shop is, back home, when I saw a man dressed in a dark leather outfit, with a flowing silver cape, silver gauntlets, and you guessed it, silver pauldrons. He looked like a cross between a certain perpetually brooding superhero and a mini boss in a fantasy RPG. His jet black hair, obviously dyed, was slicked back, allowing an uncannily lustrous forehead to brilliantly reflect the morning sunlight. If anything, the appearance was enthralling, and I found myself crossing to thankfully barren street before I even thought consciously to approach him. He saw me approaching and waved. Then I took what I assumed was meant to appear as a heroic perch upon a nearby bench, one foot on the seat with his hands on his hips. When I arrived, he greeted me, saying, "Hello there, citizen. How would you like to experience an awe inspiring power, freedom, and most importantly, responsibility that comes with being a superhero?" Thinking that it was undoubtedly a sales pitch for some fitness supplement, I said, "Sure," and put on a big, earnest smile. I've always enjoyed being an audience to showmanship, regardless of whether or not I actually intend to buy the product. He smiled back and started his spiel, which mostly consisted of him recounting fantastical exploits and feats, many having been against beings and creatures from common folklore. He alleged that he was actually several hundred years old and had, at last, grown tired of being a preternaturally empowered being. He was offering his abilities to someone, a worthy successor to his legacy. Being the only person around, most likely the only one who hadn't ignored him, I was apparently that worthy successor. He asked if I was confident that I could handle the sheer weight of the responsibilities, to which I responded that I was, and without any kind of ceremony, beyond a gesture that resembled being knighted, albeit with his hands and not a sword, he decreed me the inheritor of his fantastic power. I expected him to then cut the figurative bullshit and break out the product. He had a duffel bag with him, but he instead disrobed, decaped, and degauntlet, revealing that he had been naked the entire time beneath his armor. Shamelessly, confidently putting these aside, he then opened his duffel bag and took out some plain clothes, which, after a moment of savoring his public nudity, he put on. He'd offered a pie, "Goodbye," and left in a car, which had been stealthily parked in the shade of a nearby building, leaving me standing there dumbfounded beside his pile of armor. He hadn't tried to sell me anything. A bit disturbed by the nudity, but otherwise harmlessly amused, I started to walk away, but then I felt a sudden and powerful pull preventing me from leaving the side of my endowment. Turning around, I immediately connected the strange bodily magnetism to the pile of armor he left behind. Approaching it, I felt a sudden urge of what I could only describe as power, and upon bending down, I realized that the armor was actually shimmering, very faintly, but undeniably. Not just the silver pieces, but the black leather as well. There was a lustrous sheen upon it all, a dazzling effect, like loot in a video game. Feeling empirically entitled to the armor, he bequeathed his powers to me after all. I picked the whole bundle up, planning to take them home and just kinda hang them around somewhere. But the moment my hands came in contact with the fabric and metal, I felt an almost irresistible urge to put them on. Don the cape and cowl. There was no cowl. Not wanting to be mistaken for a crazy person, I bundled up the armor and waddled home with it, still probably looking a little crazy. Once home, I laid out on my bed and was amazed on how the set still glimmered in the relatively sunless setting of my room. The shimmering effect was plainly tied to the pieces of themselves, rather than the reflective effect of the sunlight. But even as I marveled at this, I told myself there was no way I'd be able to fit it. It was too large, several sizes beyond my own clothing, completely disproportionate to my rather ironing board looking like frame. But still, the impulse to wear it persisted, so I started putting it all on. I kept my clothes on, both to try and make the armor fit a bit better, and because he'd been nude, and I didn't want any of his sweaty residuals touching my own bare skin. And despite how it had been way too big, upon putting it on, the set fit perfectly. Had, during the process of equipping it, adjusting itself immaculately to my form. And I will say that it looked awesome. It was beyond movie quality, as if I come from some planet where people wore capes and armor all the time. I did a few poses, most of which looked awkward despite of how well the set fit me. It wasn't until I tried some action motion that I felt the latent power, the strength and capacity for great heroic feats. I then spent nearly about 20 minutes testing my strength. I found that I could lift some really heavy things, like the armoire I inherited from my grandfather, my bed, the couch, all effortlessly. Additionally, I found that I could hold my breath indefinitely, which I discovered while prepping to try and blow open my bedroom door. I could just by thinking, cause myself to levitate from the ground. I of course began thinking of my future career as a superhero, and all the amazing, incredible, death-defying things I'd do, many of which would be in the service of the people and preservation of the common good, but also a lot of selfishly cool stuff like throwing me people into the sky, flying up and catching them and then dropping them from survivable heights into bodies of water or piles of manure or great vats of piss. I didn't give much thought of how to acquire the last one. But that future was taky for me. As I've said, I was only a superhero for an hour, and that hour ended nightmarishly. I was standing in my backyard practicing my levitation. My neighbors have never paid much attention, so I wasn't worried about them spotting me. When I saw a dark spot high up in the sky, my first thought was it was just a bird, a single bird, flying directly towards me. But as the image resolved, I realized with wonder that it was a person? A human dressed somewhat similarly to myself. Amazed, suddenly hopeful of the prospect of a league or assembly of heroes, I waved up at them and settled myself back on the ground. In typical superpowered fashion, they landed in a fist and knee slap upon the earth, cratering my featureless lawn. I wasn't upset at all by the damage, the landing was just that cool. Their armor was similar to mine, except that where mine was black, there was blue, and silver instead of gold. Otherwise, the set were structurally identical. They wore a blue mask, one that covered their face with a pointed gold tiara fixed to the top. But after looking around for a moment, they revealed themselves to be a female with their voice, in which they said, "So you're the new one, huh?" It wasn't the greeting I had been expecting, nor the sense of heroic fellowship in their tone, but I said that I apparently was, and began excitedly recounting the story of my superpowered inheritance. She listened with the air of someone who had several times heard the story before, and even cut me off before I got the part about the armor magically adhering to my figure. "So, how long have you had the powers?" About 45 minutes now, I guess? Why?" She then let out a sigh of relief, but that one was strangely discomforting. Rising up from the ground in a levitating motion that was much more practiced than my own, she then said, "Because I don't have to try this time. Usually he chooses someone with a little more common sense, not someone wearing the armor and displaying the abilities in broad daylight. I saw you all the way from Texas, and I hadn't even started to search yet." Feeling suddenly and unexplainably vulnerable, I tried to levitate to her at her own level, but only managed to rise a few inches from the ground, and only at an awkward, non imposing angle. Right, well, it's been fun? The fly over here, at least. But I've got a lot of stuff to take care of, and the sooner I get him his power back, the sooner I can go back to my own life. Now, sincerely unsettled, I asked what she meant, and she responded with the unhidden exasperation. He gives his powers away so he can go on vacations every decade or so. Regular people vacations, beaches, spas, cool alcoholic beverages, and all that. Well, the thing is, he's not allowed to. He's a sworn protector of the world and all that. So I have to go out and find the person he dumped his powers on and kill them, so that the abilities revert back to him. He can't give them away for another decade or so after that. And with the powers come with an inherent sense of duty to the world, spoiling his vacation. We've been doing this for like 800 years now? I, of course, had many questions, but was unable to ask any of them, because right after finishing her explanation, her eyes became two brilliant crimson sparks, and a second later I was laying on the one spot of the ground, with my lower torso lying somewhere else. The pain was mind-breaking. I never experienced anything even a tenth of the agony, and could only manage a weak squawk in response to her landing atop of my chest, eyes still alight with that red fury. I smelled the uncomfortably savory scent of my smoldering portions, and heard the fat popping, the blood boiling and hissing, and would have pissed myself from the sheer molten gristlessness of it all, if I had control of the necessary part of the area. As you are right now, your generative powers can regrow your lost portions, so I have to keep lasering you until there is nothing left, not even a clump of cells to facilitate the regrowth, or the Hayflick limit and potential for cancerous cellular mutation simply do not apply to you, or, and no one ever chooses this, you can forfeit the powers and give them to me, and I'll leave you alone, alive, only with a bruised ego and a baby smooth new lower half. But if you think you can beat me, by all means, pop out a new pair and show me what you got. I hadn't considered the idea of fighting back, and with her standing on my chest, eyes like two burning suns, I knew it would be pointless to try. So I pathetically wheezed out some approximation of I give up, which she thankfully understood as such and not a challenge to fire away. She stepped off, deep reddening her eyes, and motioned for me to restore myself, which involved the comparably excruciating process of regrowing my waist, hips, and legs, which I can only and inaccurately compare to pushing out a really big, you know what. All the while she stared with obvious amusement, but I was in too much pain to care about the humiliation, and shrieked insensibly throughout the entire regenerative process. Once fully restored, I stood on a weak, newborn, yet shockingly toned legs, and re-announced my powers. She then told me to take off the armor, which I did, too frightened to even care about hiding my nudity. She took the bundle from me in her arms. After a brief, obviously insincere apology about the damage caused to the lawn, but not my body, she left, flying into the air with a speed that was absolutely stupefying. Just before I could turn away, a fiery stream of laser shot down from the sky, striking my old lower half, turning the only evidence of the horrible event into a pile of ash. Without my powers and the fortitude of mind and being that they had brought, I felt a resurgence of pain of my superheated bisection, and there was a force to lie on the ground and crawl back inside the house. I then fell asleep on my kitchen floor, a period of non-rest wherein I had the most terrible dreams of red-eyed giants incinerating the world. I awoke in even greater agony, feeling that I had been done by some Herculean leg day at the gym. I've had to take several crying breaks in the process of writing this. Fuck superheroes.